Hi there. Are you planning on starting with watercolor and you feel like you need some help to figure out what materials to get before you get started? Well, then don't go anywhere because this video might be perfect for you. So you're planning on starting with watercolor, and I want to tell you that I'm really excited for you because entering the world of watercolor, that's one of the nicest things that you could do because I've been painting watercolor for many years now and I love it even more every day. And there is so much to learn, but still it's always fun, no matter if you're a complete beginner, if you've been painting for quite some time. But we're going to talk about art supplies in this video, and there are a lot of different options out there. And it can be pretty intimidating because some of them are quite pricey, and since there is such a huge volume, it could be hard to know where to even start. But there are a few art supplies that you can't go without, and one of those are paper, and in my opinion, paper is probably the most important ingredient. So that's why I'm starting with paper. And since I think that the quality of the paper is very important, it will probably be a little pricey, and my first suggestion is to purchase paper in a smaller format, just like this art book here, for example. And this art book, it says Canson up here, and it's the paper from Saunders Waterford, and that's one of my favorite brands of paper to use when painting watercolors. I have another favorite brand too that I'm gonna talk about shortly. But if you look at this on the front here, you can see that this book, for example, has 40 pages, so there's plenty of room to practice. The size is A5, and you can see here on the side that the grain of the paper is fine, so that means the texture of the paper. And you can get rough grain or fine grain, and it's completely up to you what you prefer. In my opinion, finer grain is probably a little bit easier when you're doing small detail work, but the rough paper has a different feel to it. So I use both, and actually I probably use more rough paper than I use the fine kind. And here on down in the corner, you can see that the paper is pretty heavy. It's 300 grams per square meters, and that means that the paper is pretty thick as well. And thick and heavy paper doesn't buckle as much when you paint with watercolors. Because if you buy light paper and it's thin, you're gonna have a really hard time trying to figure out how to have the paint stay on one place, and yeah, it's not gonna be good. So heavier paper is always better. But heavier paper is most of the time a little more pricey. And I use 300 grams per square meters, that's my minimum, and sometimes I use 640 grams per square meters. And that's a little bit more pricey, but it's a luxurious material to work with. But 300 grams works perfectly. Okay, let's look into this art book and see what it looks like inside. So you have all these nice papers in here. You can see that there's a little bit of texture, but this is considered to be fine. And this is a good size to work with if you're a beginner. So I don't think you need anything bigger than this when you're starting out. And 40 pages, that's gonna last you a while. So this is what it looks like. And this is Canson art book, Saunders Waterford. Okay, I have another brand that I really like as well, and that is Arch watercolor paper, and that's actually my favorite. So I'm gonna show you a few examples of Arch watercolor paper as well. So this is my favorite watercolor paper, and it's Arch watercolor paper, and this one is also, the grain is fine, and it's 300 grams per square meters, as you can see here. And you can get these watercolor blocks in different sizes. And what I really like about this kind is if you open here, you can see that on the sides here you have the edge is completely glued. So the papers are glued together by the side like this. And the benefit with having paper like that is that the paper won't buckle. So you can do your painting completely until it's done. And then after you're done, then you take a little knife or something and cut out the paper that you just painted on. And then you have a completely new, fresher paper underneath waiting for you. So it's pretty practical. And buying papers in block like this, it costs a little bit more, but since it's practical, it might be worth it. This block has 20 papers in it, so that will last you quite some time as well. But if you feel like the glued edges is a little bit too pricey, then I have another option for you when it comes to Arch watercolor papers. And that is Arch's travel journal. So this is quite similar to the first art book that I showed from Canson. But the difference is that this is papers from Arches. And same thickness, 300 grams per square meters. And this one is a little smaller format. And the grain is fine here as well. And this is a really nice paper to work with, I think. And you can see here the papers are loose, so the paper will probably buckle a little bit when you paint. But for me anyways, it's not a problem. And if you feel like the paper is buckling too much, you can just use masking tape and tape around it and hold it in place. So you put the tape all the way around like this, and then on the other side too, and then it'll keep your paper pretty straight while you're painting, and then you just remove the masking tape when you're done. So these are my best tip for a beginner when it comes to watercolor paper, and I really recommend Arch watercolor paper and Saunders Waterford. So what other art supplies are there that you can't go without when you're painting watercolors? Well, brushes. Because it's going to be hard painting watercolors without brushes. And I painted with watercolors for a long time with extremely cheap brushes, and I got used to them. And I never felt, for a long time anyways, that I needed to get pricey, luxurious brushes. And today there are a lot of pretty good brushes out there for a decent price. So here are a few tips for you when it comes to brushes. When it comes to brushes, there's a lot of different alternatives out there, and that can be pretty overwhelming. And if you're on a tight budget, then there is one brush that I would really recommend that you would get. And this brush will take care of most of the things that you need to do when it comes to watercolor, and everything else is pretty much just luxury. And that is the round brush, because the round brush is the most versatile brush that you can have, because you can do pretty much anything with it. The great thing with a round brush like this one is that it has a pointed tip, which is perfect for doing the finer details. But also it can store a lot of water, especially this one. This is a Princeton Aqua Elite, and it's synthetic hair, but it almost acts like it would be natural hair on it, because it can store a lot of water. And this is something that's helpful when you're doing watercolor. Another thing that I feel like it's important is how much resistance is in the hair. So you can touch like this on your hand and you can feel how soft the hairs are, because if the hairs are too soft, that might be hard to control and paint finer details. So my suggestion is that if you're gonna get only one brush, then start with a round brush and make sure that the brush that you're choosing that has a pointed tip like this. And if you're going for a brush that can store some paint and water in it, then this one, the Princeton Aqua Elite, is a great alternative for you. If you're planning on purchasing two brushes, my second advice would be to buy a flat brush or a mop brush, just like this one. And this is also from Princeton Aqua Elite, but there are a lot of different options out there, and a lot of good different options out there. And these brushes necessarily don't have to be expensive, and they still will work really well. But flat brushes like this has its benefits too. For example, doing graded washes, or if you're gonna paint a big surface quickly, then a flat brush works perfect for that. So a flat brush and a round brush, that's a good combination to have. And after painting watercolors for a while, you probably will want to add more and more details, at least to the focal points in your paintings. And to paint the focal points, these are two good alternatives. This is called a rigger, and a rigger has a really nice pointy tip. Right now it doesn't look like that because the hairs are dry, but when you wet it, it's going to be pointier. And the rigger is good because of the long hairs. It can store a lot of water, and so you can do big long lines, which is really practical. This is an aqualine brush from Daler and Rowney, and this is called a rigger, which is practical, and these are most often pretty cheap to buy as well. And if you're going for really small details, then you can get a round brush with a really small pointed tip. And this is one is from Princeton Aqua, which I use sometimes for the finest small details in my paintings. So if you have money for 4 brushes, then a combination of these 4 would be great, I think, for you as a beginner. So I talked about paper and I talked about brushes, and there's one last ingredient that I feel like it's important for painting watercolors, and that is actually the pigments, because you can't paint watercolors without pigments. So what should you think about when it comes to pigments? Well, let's take a look at different options here. Well, when you're starting out, I think it would be practical for you to get several different pigments, and I don't want you to spend too much money. And a good way to get this is actually buying a kit with different paints. So this travel set from Aquafine comes with 12 different pigments. So I'm gonna look in it and see what it looks like. And the nice thing with this travel set is that it also has a brush that goes with it. And starting with a travel kit like this, after a while you'll probably start finding favorites in the travel kit. And when you're starting to get a few favorites, then you're probably ready to go to the next level, and that is buying paints in tubes, which I use most of the time. But I use it because I know what tubes to get. And if you're wondering if the tubes and these kind of paints in a small box like this, if they're different, no, they're exactly the same. The paint is just dry in here. But if you're using a tube, the practical thing with that is that you can just continue adding more paint when you're running low. Here you probably want to use the paint until it's completely gone to save money. So this is a really good way to start, in my opinion. And you can get paints out of a tube just like these ones, just buy them loosely. And buying your favorite paints. And if you're having a hard time here as well, figuring out what paints to get, then you can get a complete set of different paints as well. And then you will have plenty of opportunity to learn how to use these. And this is one example, for example, from Daler and Rowney. It's an Aquafine watercolor paints, and this one has a whole set of different pigments, so you have a little bit of everything. But the thing is, if you buy watercolor tubes just like this, then you will also need a palette to put your paints in. And there are a lot of different options when it comes to palettes as well. And this is one simple palette. My suggestion is that you shouldn't be spending too much money on your palette to start with. Get something small and simple before you know that you're going to continue with watercolors and so on. So start small. That's a good way of going about it, I think. And if you decide that you're going to start off by painting with watercolor tubes, then my suggestion is that you get at least the primary colors, yellow, red, and blue to start with. And if you have enough money, I would probably get the primary colors in with a little warmer temperature and with a little cooler temperature, because then you have a pretty good variation, and there's almost the sky is the limit on what paints you can mix together. Okay guys, I hope you enjoyed this video and you found it helpful, and hopefully you found some courage to buy some nice watercolor paper. And once again, I'm excited for your journey, because if it hasn't started yet, then you have some exciting times in front of you. So good luck. Okay guys, I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.